Mall Studios. This is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 5 minutes. Make it 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. The clock is just driving me nuts, Robin. Changing clocks. Hey, I worked for 3 years at an assisted living facility, and those 3 years was an eye-opener for me, sitting at a microphone pretty much all the rest of my life. I wasn't exposed to real life, Robin.
Yeah.
So for those 3 years, in the assisted living facility, they had an area called what was it called again?
Memory support
unit. Memory support unit, yeah.
Memory support.
And I got to know a lot of the folks back there and the families of those people. And in fact, in the area of the facility that was not memory support, there were a few of those people who slipped into dementia and needed memory support assistance also. So I got to see firsthand what it looks like when somebody is afflicted, I guess is a good word, with dementia. And dementia is one, I guess, is the umbrella term for things like Alzheimer's, which is part of that. It's all I really know about that subject, except for the fact that I witnessed it taking people down to the absolute bottom. Dr. Ann Kenny has written a book. It's called Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care and Dementia. This is a truly tough decision, and I hope every assisted living facility, any place that does memory support, you got to get this book. It'll help out the families. Dr. Kenny is a consulting physician, a professor at the University of Connecticut Health Center, and again, her book, Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care and Dementia. Good morning, Doctor.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Are you in Connecticut right now?
No, I'm in Austin, Texas.
In Texas? Would you move?
Yeah. No, I'm here at a conference. Although when I compare the temperatures, I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, there you go.
You know. Speaking of geography, just for a second, when I was in the memory support unit, I didn't work in there, but I would visit there all the time just to say hi to the people. And I accidentally picked up these flashcards that were photographs of things. And one of the photographs was the Empire State Building. And one of the ladies who was very, very quiet, hardly said anything, when I picked it up, she said, "Oh, that's in New York." And the ladies who worked with her on a regular basis said, "Oh my God, I can't believe she said something." So have you ever had that experience where something triggers, and it didn't bring her back in any way? I don't know. It wasn't like a miracle cure, but just for that one moment, she came to or something.
Absolutely. Dementia is a disease, and it hits your brain and everyone's brain in different ways. We're still the people we are, and although we can't communicate as well or we can't function as well, there'll always be that person in there, and you never know when that person will come and show themselves as they were. My mom one time, who was relatively nonverbal, when they were doing an exercise and going around the room, and they were saying, "Please describe your mother," to the women and men who were living at her facility. When they came to her, she actually said fastidious, which is just the way you would describe my grandmother. But for a woman who is nearly nonverbal to come up with fastidious was amazing.
Yeah. And another story I wanted to tell you, there was a lady in the same facility, and she did not live in the memory support unit because her husband didn't want her in there. And so to alleviate that need, he decided to live in the facility, in the part that was not memory support. So the two of them lived there, and so this lady was constantly asking me when was lunch. And I would always tell her, and then I'm not making this up, less than a minute later, she would ask me, when is lunch? And so it became an odd thing, and of course, I liked having fun with everybody, and she could play piano. And when I discovered that, I would say, her name was Rita, I would say, Rita, can you play me that song on the piano? She said, which one? I said, I don't remember, but it was really pretty. And she would sit at the piano and literally play for a half hour. Just beautifully, too. Isn't that weird? I don't know. It means something, but it just was a way for me to handle what I had to.
Absolutely. Right. And music is one of the areas that comes into our brains in a host of directions, not just language or memory. And so music is frequently a way to get to people and communicate with them, just as you're describing, in a beautiful way, and honor who they are. Absolutely.
Your book is a very eye-opening book because it does tell the reader that there is no cure for dementia, and then it takes the reader through the life from the beginning to end, and you talk about the holistic approach.
Yes, I think in the United States, 500,000 people are diagnosed with dementia every year, and most people live very well with dementia for several years before they even need to move into something like the assisted living facility, if they ever need to move at all. But as the disease progresses, as we go through the full course of the disease, it's a chronic disease, so we don't often think of it as the terminal disease that it can become. But just like a slow cancer, it can be with us for a long time, and we don't notice it too much. We adapt to the things that are happening, like the husband and wife who moved into assisted living so that she could continue to function at her highest level. But at the very end, we lose the ability, and the end can be anywhere from 3 months to about 3 years. We lose the ability to talk, to toilet, to walk, and that's the time when I think we don't do this very well in the United States. We don't shift our focus from living well with the disease and doing the most we can to promote independence. We fail to start to die with the disease. And I think when you think about the bigger picture, you can start backing off on some things that are life prolonging and shift to more of a comfort approach.
So I was watching one of those on TV judge shows. I don't think it was Judge Judy, but it might have been. But I just mentioned her name so that you know what I'm talking about. One of those kind of shows. And there was an adult brother and sister, and they were both kind of arguing about which home the elderly father should live in. And so the elderly father was there, and the judge, whoever she or he was, asked the person to come to the stand, and the person was very much afflicted with dementia. However, the father was able to say, I don't want either of you to have to deal with me. I want to be someplace where neither of you are burdened with that. He had enough sense to say that kind of a thing. And I wonder if I was in that position, would I not just say, "Can you just not feed me? Can you just let me fade into nothing?" I don't know. Is that one of the? We don't have that choice in America, obviously. Well, we do actually.
Do we? The feeding we do. A group in New York, End of Life New York, is a compassionate approach and has an advanced directive. Also, the University of Washington in Seattle put out an advanced directive that is dementia specific, so that when you're early in your disease, with your advanced directive that says, I don't want to be on life support, I don't want to have a feeding tube, there's a dementia rider, so to speak, an extra advanced directive that says, if I get to the point where I can no longer feed myself independently, I want you only to offer me food as comfort. And then in the New York one, it actually says, I don't want you to offer me food at all. And as long as you make those decisions when you're of full capacity, when you can continue to make that choice from a good state of mind, that should be honored. We haven't really had that challenged in the court system yet. The advanced directive, which was written by Judy Schwartz, who's an RN who's been with End of Life New York for many, many years and an excellent clinician. It's a new thing she just put out, and you can go to their website and find that rider. But it hasn't been around long enough for the people who are writing it now to see if it would hold up. But one thing that the writer does say is, if you're going to go into a facility, have your family make sure that the administration there would honor it.
And that's one thing about being a caregiver, is that it is extremely emotional, but the caregiver has to retain their objectivity, because once the person starts going down the road of dementia, they're the ones that have to make those decisions.
Yes, and that's why I wrote the book. It is so difficult to be the caregiver, the one that has to make these decisions. Most of us would say, I would gladly make these decisions for myself, but there's such a level of extra anxiety and burden if you're making it for someone else. You wonder, did I do too little? Did I do too much? Did I do it right? And then there's also the pressure on what society thinks of you, what your other siblings think of you, what your children think of you. Yeah. And so the book has actually quite a few sections in it to try to help with some of those feelings. I think sometimes it helps to have people kind of go through a life inventory for themselves, and then think, okay, how would my parent, how would my sibling, how would my partner answer these questions? And then, so that gives you that little bit of objectivity, as Robin just mentioned, to step away from, oh, I would make this decision, but they may make this decision, and increases your awareness to see, I'm actually making it for someone else. And then it also, the book tries to give you a little bit of language when somebody pushes back at you, because most people want to, quote, fix things. You know, they want to help it be better. And I don't think most people are actually trying to be judgmental, but when you're the one making the decision, it feels like judgment. Yeah. And so I just recommend people say, I know it's very complex, but this is the way my family is handling it. So, you know, kind of acknowledging that the person isn't trying to harm you by saying, I hear you. And that's what most people want, is to be heard. And then say, and it's very complex, meaning there's no way you could know all the pieces that are going into this, and then say, and my family is making this choice. And so that it becomes, I have a whole support team of my own.
So having this conversation before anything ever sets in is probably the best way to establish exactly what each of us wants.
Absolutely. And that's the hard part. I'm actually working on my next book, which will address just what you're saying. And as I've done some piloting, I realize, you know, just doing the facts and figures scares people. They won't have the conversation. Speaking about death, it remains relatively taboo in this country. There's all kinds of death over dinner, the Conversation Project, things like that to help you and guide you in how to have these conversations, but people still shy away from them. So I think that having them in small doses and frequently, and actually saying up front, we're going to talk about this for a little bit. We don't have to have a deep conversation about it, but I want to plant the seed, and we're going to come back and talk about it later. Because I think some people need to journal about it or walk with it and be in their own self. Otherwise, they get too reactionary or they push away. There's statistics that say that something like 25% of adult children, people who are 45 and above, refuse to talk about end-of-life issues with their parents, even when they know their parents are terminally ill. It just shows you how much we won't address it.
Well,
it is tough, yeah.
And I think it's because, you know, the children just see their parents as the way their parents used to be, and they're in denial.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Denial, or, you know, this is just these are difficult conversations. And so, but they can transform from difficult to wonderful if we allow it.
I have a recollection, maybe it's been 2 years already, but we had some guests in the studio from our local hospice, and I believe they had like a 4 or 5 page questionnaire that in my memory. Do you remember this, Robin? It seems similar to what we're talking about here, to kind of stimulate the conversation that you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of templates out there to help people have these conversations. I think that one of the most well viewed is the Conversation Project, which has a toolkit. It's Ellen Goodwin is the individual who put that out there, and there's a website, theconversationproject.org, I believe.
So the book, Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care and Dementia, is what we're talking about. The author of the book is our guest, Dr. Ann Kenny, in Texas, but she's from Connecticut. I mentioned in the intro that this would be a good book for anybody who has a loved one in a facility, or maybe just living with dementia but at home. Does it guide you as a family? I wanted to ask you about the group part of this, because I remember this when my father was ill. He got sick about Father's Day and he died about Thanksgiving. So there was a long period of time. Now, in his case, there was no dementia, but the idea that he was at the end of his life was clear to all of us, probably less so than me. I'm probably the most guilty party of looking for something unreasonable to happen or miraculous or whatever. My brother, who's a doctor, by the way, was probably the most level-headed one, but I didn't want to listen to him. And maybe that what I just described to you in my own family is what could have been alleviated with the book. Am I right?
I hope so. I think that I hope there's enough information in there that it helps people see the normal progression of the disease, so that those who want to see what the disease is doing will be able to read it. It has a lot of studies of other people's families in there, of people that I've helped take care of their families over the years. And hopefully you could see a bit of yourself in one of those stories, so that you could recognize the progression, so that your whole family could get on the same page in talking about it. And it's not just, it's stories of other families, which I think helps you see yourself either, in films and stories. It's easier to see.
Doctor, I'm wondering if in your experience, as you've known people who've gone through this, do you see the families incorporating their religious beliefs as a way to maybe make this easier? Does that happen?
Definitely. There are families who are spiritual who can then use that spirituality to help guide them to that place of death. I think in our more secular society, we don't have that as much as we did, but there are still definitely families that tap into their spirituality. I think with dementia, it is much easier when you feel that there's a higher power, because you have to get out of your head as much to communicate and more into your heart, which I think is that place of spirituality and soul. So when you're communicating with somebody with dementia, it becomes much more how you feel, how they feel, and then that connection becomes stronger. And when you open up your heart in that way, I think that's the place where spirituality comes in, and you can kind of feel your way towards, I'm losing them, but I'm not really losing them. Right. I've got them in my heart. Yeah.
And that's what's wonderful about the individual stories. You have them from individual people, you have them from couples, and it really gives a great perspective on this.
Thank you.
Does the type of dementia make a difference? Like, the only one I know is Alzheimer's. I mean, but I know that's one of many, right? Does it matter?
It does. Dementia is that umbrella term, as you mentioned in the very beginning. Alzheimer's is the most common. It's about 70% of dementias, but there's other dementias from strokes or mini strokes. It's called vascular dementia, and there's another dementia it's relatively common called frontotemporal disease dementia, and it has usually a more rapid course and a lot of personality changes and disinhibitions. So that one, I think, is a little more difficult for many families to have trouble with, because it's not as much the person that they knew and loved, but new and unusual things happen more often, making it an even more difficult struggle.
Well, you managed to help a lot of other people, a lot of other families adjust to dementia and what to do to help themselves and their loved one that has dementia. How did you stay objective through your own personal time with your mother?
Oh, I'm not sure I did. But when my mom was sick with or had dementia and was living with it, it actually helped because I had all these other families who had been role models for me, and I had seen how they had adapted. I also saw when they had maladapted, and so I could use that as a lesson as well. But I saw so many examples of people just living so well with dementia that it gave me a great bit of hope, and it helped me counsel my mom and my siblings on when we were starting to do too much for her when she could still do her own thing, or when we were doing too little as she started to lose that capacity. But in the very end, it was the examples of all those other families that helped, and knowing what was going to come next, I think was what was very helpful for me. Knowing the disease is, I wasn't always surprised when she had a downturn, but that didn't stop me from crying, from needing therapy, from grieving for my mother. Some days I would grieve before she was gone, and some days I could find nothing but joy in it. But I had every emotion, and in a way, I found that to be a huge gift of dementia, is that I learned to live through each of those emotions, and not just in a little Pollyanna world, but life has to be great. But I learned so much from the good emotions and the bad emotions.
Right.
And
did your mom ever forget who you were?
I know she didn't really know who I was, but she knew I was someone special to her. She knew that we had a connection. I wouldn't say she couldn't name me, or she didn't necessarily know I was her daughter, but she definitely knew I was one of her specials. Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Makes you want to cry.
Oh my gosh, isn't that something? Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, again, going back to the 3 years I worked at the facility, which by the way was 16 years ago, Robin, that I worked there.
Yeah, a long time.
I remember, like, the husband, for example, of one of the ladies who was severely afflicted with dementia, and he was telling his daughter, who had come to visit before she went in there, that's not your mother anymore. You're going to see the body she used to live in, but she's not in there anymore. And I never knew the lady before this, so I didn't know who she was. But it was interesting to hear that he felt like she had already died, but just the body was just kind of living on. That's kind of weird, isn't it?
Well, I think that's a very common feeling, and it's a type of grief that you have to deal with. There's a dissociation when the person you know is not there anymore, and yet their body is, and so that's a whole kind of grieving. What those other families helped me see was, we're not the same person necessarily we were 16 years ago. I mean, there's threads of us, but I'm sure you've changed a lot in those 16 years. And that's what families taught me. She may not be the mother that baked pie crust with me, but she's still my love.
That's
and
right.
I will learn to love the new person in front of me. And so I don't know if that's what he was trying to say to her. She's not going to respond to you like she did when you were a little girl, but you still can have this beautiful connection with her.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
And so many people taught me that. And and that's why sometimes when people move to long-term care facilities, the staff get upset with you if you're not going to, do what they want, because they have fallen in love with the person in front of them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. The book is called Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care and Dementia. I have a copy of the book here. It's written by Dr. Ann Kenny, and oh, just saw your picture. You're a pretty lady. Look at that, Rob.
I know.
Wow. All right, I have the book. If you would like the book, give me a call.
She likes train rides too.
Oh yeah, you were stuck on a train. Robin and I were stuck on a train. Oh my gosh.
Tell that story.
I wanted to do Amtrak for all my life, and then when I did, it was like 7 hours late. It was crazy. Doctor, thank you for being on the air with us. Do you have a website you want to tell us about?
My website is AnnKennyMD.com. Ann is with an E, Kenny's with only one E. So I took the second E from Kenny and brought it up to the first name.
All right. Doctor, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
I think this is going to be very beneficial for those who are going through this right now. We'll be right back.
This Monday will be warm but humid with clouds and sunshine at a high of 82 at the coast, 86 inland. Partly to mostly cloudy Monday night, low 67 inland, 71 along the coast. Tuesday, partly sunny, very warm but humid, high 83 at the coast, 87 inland. More the same on Wednesday, a mix of sun and clouds, high 83 at the coast, 87 inland. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.